Right, members, we've got a quorum already, so may I now call to order this special meeting of the panel to discuss housing-related policy initiatives in the policy address. Please invite the administration in. We've got paper CB143812113 bracket 01. Housing-related policy initiatives of Transport and Housing Bureau. As I expect many panel members and non-panel members to be present at this meeting, I will allow each member 3 minutes, including questions and answers in the first round. And if possible, I'll allow a second round. I want to make sure that everybody has a chance to ask questions. Secretary, please be concise in your introduction. Chairman, I'm extremely happy today to be at the meeting of the Housing Panel to brief members on housing-related policy initiatives in the 2013 policy address. Now, the crux of the problem is shortage of supply and also high rentals, and these are beyond the affordability of the general public. We are determined to break this vicious cycle. We will strengthen our efforts to increase the supply of housing, especially public sector housing. So it's going to be a supply-led strategy, and we'll also enhance the role of public sector housing. In fact, in the policy address, the CE stated very clearly that the administration was committed to helping the grassroots move into public housing and helping the middle class acquire their own accommodation. And so we will try to increase housing supply and also land supply. First of all, concerning the average waiting time for PRH flats, at the moment it's 3 years. We will still maintain this target. We'll still provide PRH for low-income families in need. We understand that there is an increasing demand for PRH in society. We've determined to increase the supply from an average of 15,000 per year on the average to 20,000. Now, concerning supply of land, planning, consultation, and then design, construction, that will take a few years. And so for the new PRH will be completed in 2018, and from beyond that, the total supply of public rental housing will be at least 100,000 units. So the base 75,000 is the baseline. We'll try to advance the completion of the PRH flats, and we'll try to increase housing supply as far as possible in the short term and the medium term. In order that we can increase the supply of public rental housing, we need to identify suitable sites. We need to make the best use of existing sites. And so where planning permits and without compromising environmental quality, we'll seek to optimize the development potential of each site and increase flat production through relaxing the plot ratio and building height restrictions. We'll also critically review the redevelopment potential of aged PRH estates. For new HOS, a total of 17,000 units will be produced over 4 years from 2016-17, followed by a further increase thereafter. The Hong Kong Housing Society will participate in the supply of subsidized housing. In view of the favorable response to us, the Greenview Villa, we've identified another site in Sha Tin and will invite the HS to build a similar development for sale. Around 700 subsidized housing units will be provided. And concerning the My Home Purchase plan, these flats will be sold. We understand that the latest income limit for subsidized housing is kept at $40,000 a month, and we believe that in future the income limit for HOS flats should enable those who were previously eligible for MHPP to become eligible under the HOS, and so we've decided not to roll out any more MHPP projects. The 4 sites originally earmarked for MHPP will be released to HA for HOS development instead. And then for private housing, we estimate that a total of 67,000 first-hand units should come on the market in the next 3 to 4 years. Previously, private developers provided about 9,000 flats a year, so there will be increases. Out of the 67,000 flats, there are 48,000 units under construction, but not yet sold or offered for sale, 4,000 unsold units of completed projects, and 15,000 units from disposed sites ready for construction. So these 67,000 units should be available for sale in the market in or before 2015. But of course, the actual supply of private housing units ultimately depends on the construction progress of private developers, as well as when the completed flats are put up for sale in the market. The government will continue to monitor the sources of land supply, and depending on market response, we will proactively make available more sites for residential development. The Long-Term Housing Strategy Steering Committee is presently looking at the medium to long-term needs of various groups in the community. We will, in particular, pay attention to the housing needs of special groups, including elderly, non-elderly singletons over the age of 35, and poorly housed families. The steering committee will also set priorities so as to enable us to carry out long-term planning in respect of housing supply. And I've mentioned poorly housed families. They include those living in subdivided flats. We will engage a research institution to assess the condition and to project the number of subdivided flats in Hong Kong. If we can obtain more information about subdivided flats, then LTHS steering committee will have a sound basis for studying the problem. Housing supply depends on land supply. So we will be working very closely with Development Bureau and relevant departments so that we can, on a sustained basis, increase land supply for housing. Chairman, as I have said just now, it's going to be a supply-led strategy. We will progressively and in line with the objectives, try to bring about improvements to the situation. Secretary, can you please give us a copy of your speech so that we can make copies for members? But then it's a handwritten script. Perhaps I can make the arrangement later, but I think these points are in the information paper. So anyway, please give us your script afterwards. Many members are queuing up to speak, so let's see whether we can have a second round. We'll start the first round first. 3 minutes for each member. Now, the scheduled finishing time is 6:30 p.m. I hope members will agree that we should extend the meeting by 15 minutes to 6:45 p.m. Fernando Zhang, Kwok-hing, Lee Chuk-yan, Mak Mei Kun, Chen Wei-chun, Joseph Lee, Elizabeth Quat, Chen Yun-han, Lo Wei-kwok, etc., etc. All right, Mr. Fernando Zhang. Thank you, Chairman. May I refer to paragraph 53 and 54 of the policy address? So it seems that he understands the problem very well. I mean, subdivided flats. He has visited such flats, and he said ventilation was poor, air quality was poor. In some subdivided flats, there was no natural lighting or sunlight. He said there were safety problems, hygiene problems, and he also said that 3 or 4 decades ago, hillside, squatter huts and rooftop structures posed have a natural hazards, and today cage homes, cubicle apartments and subdivided units also pose serious fire and health risks. And so our housing problem was out there to be seen, blah, blah, blah. Last week, Chairman, the Undersecretary said that there was value in the existence of subdivided flats. But then, 2 days ago, the CE told us that subdivided flats represented the dark side of the Hong Kong community. So I want to know whether what is said in the policy address overrules the remark made by the Undersecretary? And will you be phasing out subdivided flats? That's the first point. And then second, which part of your housing policy can immediately deal with this dark side of Hong Kong society? Secretary. Now, concerning subdivided flats, I think there are two problems. Now, first of all, there are different types of subdivided flats, but I think the basic consideration is whether they are safe and they are structurally safe. And in this regard, the Buildings Department is responsible for enforcement. And then secondly, although some subdivided flats may be safe, but then some are forced to live in subdivided flats, and the living environment or living conditions are poor, and so we have to see how we can house them in PRH. Now, low-income families can queue up on the waiting list, and our target is still an average waiting time of 3 years with regard to the first allocation of flats. Now, I think he hasn't answered my question. I want to know whether the administration is willing to withdraw the remark that there is some value in having subdivided flats. And second, which part of the government's housing policy can immediately deal with the problem or the problems faced by those living in subdivided flats, because living conditions are extremely poor? All right, perhaps you can queue up again, Mr. Zhang. Mr. Kwok, may I refer to paragraph 55 of the policy address, where there are 200,000 or more than 200,000 waiting on the waiting list, and this number is going to increase. But then the supply will only be 170,000. So for those at the end of the queue, they have to wait for over a decade. The Secretary kept emphasizing an average waiting time of 3 years. How can the administration deliver its pledge? If it can't deliver its pledge, then how can the administration or the Bureau help those living in cage homes, cubicles, cubicle apartments and subdivided flats? Will you provide a rent subsidy for them, or will you provide a rent tax allowance for them? Secretary. Chairman, the waiting time is on the average 3 years for the first allocation of flats. This is applicable to those on the general waiting list. But then there are some who are subject to the quota and score system, and they do not fall within the 3-year policy. But of course, the LTHS steering committee is carrying out a comprehensive review, including the quota and points system, and also the priorities for different age groups or sectors. And then as to whether a rent subsidy or rent allowance should be offered, in fact, I have said in this council before that at the moment, housing supply is extremely tight. And when there is inadequate supply, and if the administration proposes to provide a rent subsidy, then landlords will be inclined to increase the rentals. What about a tax allowance? All right. If you are unwilling to provide a rent subsidy, what about a tax allowance for rental payment? Now, the Financial Secretary in the annual budget exercise listens to the views of different sectors. But as I have said just now, in a market where the supply is extremely tight, if there is any measure which would mean that more people will be paying more. Now, the FTU really feels that you must increase PRH supply. You must deliver your promise of an average waiting time of 3 years for the 200,000 on the waiting list. Chairman, today we've announced an increase in supply, but then the completed flats will only appear a few years later. Mr. Lee Chok-yan. So the administration is acting slowly, and then the public are still suffering in subdivided flats, in cage homes. They will continue to have to live in very poor conditions. I think in respect of housing, you're not doing anything in the short term, in the medium term, in the long term. Right, medium term, 15,000 flats per year. That was the pledge made in the last term.
So I think you're taking things at your own pace. So during the Donald Trump era, you complained or criticized him, but then you're actually doing very much the same thing. So, all right, there is no rent control, no rent allowance, and also there is no interim housing in the urban area. So, Bureau Director, in fact, C.Y. Leung, as far as housing is concerned, has cheated people most. In fact, there are two cheats. Number one, he said that he would be advancing the last batch of 35,000 units a year, so that in 4 years, for the first 4 years, he'll be able to have the 75,000. But then, will you be able to do that? Will you be able to expedite things so that the 75,000 units can be completed in 4 years? And also, you said that there's a shortage of land, but then in fact there is land available. For example, for village Village Valley Road, and also in North Point Village or North Point Estate. In fact, there are sites available, and they are already formed. You can put up flats as soon as possible. In fact, you're still cheating. In fact, sites are available, but then is that you're not willing or you're not able to put them up for sale. And you're actually allowing developers to make huge profits. And in fact, when you talk about identifying sites, so which sites will be for PRH, which sites will be for the private developers? I suspect that all the sites will be made available for private developers, and therefore you're not able to come up with sites for PRH development. Is that the case? Bureau Director, no, I don't think that's the case in the next few years. In identifying new housing sites, actually, most of them will be used for public housing, and of course including HOS, and of course the ratio will be higher. And it depends on the location and also the sites themselves. They might be suitable for different types of housing. With regard to housing supply, well, I can put it this way. Well, what we are facing is an overall shortage of housing sites. In the short term, there is a shortage of such sites. Even if a site is available today, even if we press the button for PRH development right away, but then in fact when flats are put up for occupation, that will be a few years later. That's why, as we said, after the new term of government has assumed office, we believe that we have to substantially increase housing supply, and we will have to increase the ratio of public housing supply. And in doing so, in fact, converting a site into units for occupation will take a few years. In terms of the flow chart, that's inevitable. But then what about Village Valley Road? It can be put up for development right away. All right. Please make sure that you do so within 3 minutes, including the question and answer. All right, Alice Mack or Lee Cheuk-yan, if you're not happy, then you can queue up for another round. Yes, Alice Mack. Yes, just now what you said would be what is going to happen many years down the road. But then, what is most pressing right now is those who are not able to get a roof above their head. All right, within the next 3 years, you will not be able to do that. You will not be able to meet the 3-year target. According to the FTU's request, you will have to offer this tax allowance and also this rent allowance. You said that would push up rents. But then if you do nothing, then rents are still going up. So why can't you be more pragmatic so that you can help those grassrooters, because they are on the queue, they're waiting for that, and why don't you just offer them with this rent allowance, because that would at least offer them some help, because the rents are going up anyway. Whatever you do, rents are going up anyway. And what we are faced with is not just about public housing. In private housing, actually developers are so dominating that they're actually holding up flats, and they are not going to sell them. So as the policy address said, how are you able to come up with tens of thousands of units, all right, within the next 3 or 4 years, 67,000 units in the next 3 or 4 years ready for sale? So developers are actually having things their way, and they are acting in such a manner that you're not able to do anything about it. So in your paper, you talk about, in para 24, actually I find that disappointing, because in the PA, the CE said that 67,000 units would be available, but then in your paper, in para 24, you're actually trying to put a rider on it. All right, you said that for private housing units, in the end, that would still be dependent or that would still ultimately hinge on the construction progress of private developers as well as the exact timing as to when the completed flats are offered for sale in the market. So I think you're actually putting in this rider. I think you will have to do something in order to push the developers a bit so that once flats are available, they should be put up for sale. And then also, can you introduce this vacant flats tax? Would you dare to do it? Bureau Director. All right, just now Ms. Mack talked about hoarding up tax and also vacant flat tax. I think many have voiced it in the community, and we have heard that we'll consider that. Well, it's not about the voices in the community. I'm putting this to the administration. Do you have the gut to do it? Do you dare to do it? Well, Chairman, for any tax in any design, we will have to look at it holistically. We will have to look at the impact on the economy as well. But that in response to what Ms. Mack said in para 24 in a paper. All right, we just set out the objective situation. All right, if some sites have been bought by the developer, all right, in the lease terms, they might be required to complete the flats within a number of years. But then there is no requirement for them to put up the flats for sale within a certain period of time. And therefore, you will have to put some pressure to bear on them. Well, as I said, according to our assessment, out of these flats, well, some of them are still under construction, and in accordance with their past practice, well, they will apply for the sale of pre-completed flats, and therefore we expect that by 2015, a large number of flats will be available. That's as I said in my opening statement. But then, of course, the objective situation is if there is no such a requirement for them to put up the flats for sale, then of course that will be decided by the developer. All right, you have overrun too much, and therefore please grasp the time, or else I'll have to draw a line somewhere because the response has been too enthusiastic. Yes, Tony Chair, I think that's the top priority of the administration in resolving housing problem. And you said that you have the grassroots buy their own homes, and also the middle class would also be assisted. But then in terms of those in need, all right, you will also be providing a progressive housing ladder for those in need. But then in the policy address, little is mentioned about this. So what's meant by having a progressive housing ladder? Can you give us more details? And also, looking at the present situation where there are health and physical hazards. For example, some of these flats and residents are living in industrial buildings, and they are also living in subdivided flats. So has the administration considered this? For those in pressing needs, well, maybe that there might be health, hygiene, and physical hazard problem. So for those living in cage homes, subdivided flats, so do you have any measures to help them or policies to help them? Two questions, Bureau Director. All right, to answer the earlier question, for those living in poor housing, all right, if they are already on a queue, if they are already on the waiting list, if they have already set up their families, then the average waiting time of 3 years will still be our target. And that depends on the specific situation of these applicants. In other words, they will have to wait for a long time, but then they're already subjected to appalling housing conditions. So you're talking about a few years wait. All right, for those, let's say if it's an illegal subdivided flat or in industrial buildings, then in the course of law enforcement, if they have to be phased out, then of course for those who are affected, we do have interim housing available for them. As regards building this progressive housing ladder, well, in our paper and also in the policy address, we said that the basic solution to this is through public rental housing. We'd like to take care of the grassroots needs, and then on top of that, we hope that there is room for people to own their own homes so that they can buy their own homes. For example, HKHS flats, which are similar to HOS flats. And what about the middle class? Because, well, for the 40,000 housing or income limit, and then for the middle class, it can be between 40 and 60,000, and in the past we had the My Home Purchase Plan, and now it's scrapped. So if they do not have the down payment available, then where do they get the money? All right, for MHPP, all right, the income limit is set at 40,000 $40,000. That's why, as we said in the paper, that would also be used as an income limit for the new HOS scheme. And that would also cover some 70% of the households in Hong Kong, and therefore the target is already quite wide. Dr. Joseph Lee. Chairman, I'd also like to follow up on an earlier point. $40,000 to $60,000, and the Bureau Director said that some 70% of the households would be covered. But then what about the remaining 20-30%? Are they regarded as middle class? Because in the policy address, the CE made it very clear in terms of his philosophy of governance. All right, under item B, he said that he would encourage people to procure their own homes. To a certain extent, but then apparently you're not going to do anything about subdivided flats, and also for private housing, you dare not do anything about it because you're concerned that people might be holding up their flats and refuse to sell them. So what about the middle class? What is going to happen to them? Because in the policy address, you talk about the long-term situation. You said that you'll be increasing or expediting PRH development so that more people in need can be housed, and also for HOS, you're going to relaunch it, and that would also be welcome. But then what about the remaining 20-30%? They have paid a lot of tax, and yet is it that they are totally excluded under your housing policy? Because in the policy address, I would have expected that the CE talk about his philosophy. Well, these might be high-sounding, nothing slogans, but what about these 20-30% people? So are you going to ignore them altogether? Bureau Director, well, yes, housing supply is indeed very tight, and for the existing resources, they are limited, and therefore we will have to set priorities. Well, that's why for PRH, priority has been given to those with households. And what about those earning more than $40,000? Yes, I'll be moving on to that. Well, for home purchasing, well, the income limit is now set at $40,000, and as I said, that would cover some 70% of the total number of households. But what about those earning more? Well, the need would be somewhat different. But then it doesn't mean that for private property market, we're going to ignore that altogether. As we've been saying, and recently the FS has also said that he'll be monitoring the market closely, and where there is a need, we do not rule any possibility of introducing further measures. But then it's difficult because the CE said that on the one hand that he would like to help people to buy their own homes. But then what about these people? Well, for the 20+%, they are renting an accommodation, but then you're not going to offer any rent assistance and so on. So what is going to happen to them? Well, we are from the middle class, and we are those earning more than $40,000. So what is going to happen to them? So is it that you're not going to help them at all? I think the Bureau Director has already answered your question. I think he just gave a very circumvented answer. It's a very convoluted answer. I said that we had to set priorities. Any follow-up? He has not answered the question, and therefore I have no further follow-up. Yes, Ms. Elizabeth Kwok. Yes, thank you, Chairman. All right, doing the calculation, some 200,000 people are on the waiting list. They're waiting for PRH, and even deducting the singletons, there are over 100,000 households, and also singleton elders, and therefore at least 33,000 a year will be needed, and only 15,000 will be available. And even if you're able to recover some 7,000, still there is a shortfall of some 11,000. So the target of having of meeting a target of 3 years for first allocation will not be met. So while we are still waiting, if the administration is still not able to identify more sites for PRH construction, then what is going to happen? Because the DAB has been asking that rent allowance be offered to those on the waiting list. I hope that the administration will reconsider it, because more needs to be done for these people. And earlier on, the administration also suggested that for industrial buildings, they can also be converted into interim or transitional housing, but then nothing has happened since then. So can the administration consider this? That is on government land, in particular those located in the urban areas. Can we have some interim housing run by social enterprises so that these people can have more choices? Bureau Director, if the administration has site available, then we will directly build PRH flats, so there is no need for transitional or interim housing. But then some are suggesting that for some industrial buildings, they can also be converted and revitalized for interim housing. Well, that will be considered. Well, for those on the waiting list, well, let's set aside the non-singleton and non-elderly singleton. Yes, there are close to 100,000, but then we cannot just do it by simple arithmetic, because by the time when allocation is offered, it doesn't mean that all of them are eligible anymore, because while they're waiting, their conditions might change. But then we are still holding on to this 3-year average waiting time target. So we'll be looking at that as our target, and that would also serve as a reminder for the administration. We will have to ensure that there will be sustained supply of PRH flats. But then you said that in the interim, some people might be falling off because they might no longer be eligible. But then there are also newcomers joining the queue, and therefore the need will still be there. So in the interim, how are you going to help those on the queue? Because you still have not, you still haven't got the flats available. So what is going to be done about it? Well, as we said, we'll still be adhering to the 3-year rule. But then, as Ms. Kwok said, the demand in the community is large, and therefore I would not underestimate the demand, and therefore for the 3-year first allocation target, we will still be adhering to that. And if the demand continues, then our supply will also have to continue. But then Ms. Kwok was saying that other than what you just said, will there be other measures? And the focus should be on alternative measures. Well, as far as PRH is concerned, we will have to follow the established procedure. But then for industrial buildings, whether some industrial buildings can be converted into interim housing and so on, as I already said, the administration will also consider the possibility.
Ms. Chen Yun-han, Chairman. I really don't know how the Secretary is going to tackle this very hopeless situation. We have these developers who are in a very strong position. Property prices are rising, rentals are rising, the share prices of property stocks are rising. Now, in para 50, C.Y. Leung likened those living in cage houses, cubicle apartments, or divided flats to those living in the squatter huts. Now, I want to make these suggestions. First of all, as Ms. Mack has pointed out, you should impose a tax on land lying idle, and then second, there should be a tax levied on vacant first-hand flats. But then I really think you must do something to tackle the problem. And there are many young people applying for public rental housing, but do you know that because of the unfair well-off tenant policy, some of the young people have to move out? They can no longer live with their parents. Now, say for example, if young people earn $10,000, then they have to move out so that the family income will not be exceeded, or the household income will not be exceeded. And then I think another solution is to relaunch the sale of flats to sitting tenant scheme. So you are driving young people out of PRH. I think you should relaunch the scheme of selling flats to sitting tenants. I think these are all effective solutions. C.Y. Leung said that he would not consider rent control, but I would advise him to think about this again. You have to resort to various strategies, including scaring people, scaring the developers. You must try all these various ways and means. You must not collude, or people may feel that you are colluding with developers. Now, members can be assured that we do not collude with developers. We are concerned about the housing problem we have at the moment. Now, I want to say that member suggestions will be considered. Concerning rent control, the CE has already pointed out his concern. And then tax concessions, tax allowances, the FS will look at these suggestions. And then sale of flats to sitting tenants, there are 39 estates under the scheme. Some have asked for an expansion of the scheme. Now, in fact, we've explained to LegCo why we have reservations about expanding the scheme. But then I understand that all these are being looked at again in the LTHS steering committee. Mr. Kwok-hing. Chairman, I've got two questions. First, in relation to land supply, and second, in relation to PRH supply. Now, many members want to know how many flats there are in the hands of the developers. Now it seems that our developers do have a very sound strategy to offer flats for sale in the market. And so concerning a tax on land lying idle, a tax for vacant first-hand flats, I think we need such measures so that developers will not get the maximum profit, and everybody in Hong Kong will only be working very hard for developers. And then there are over 200,000 applications on the waiting list. Many of them are singletons. And I do understand that our public housing policy is mainly family-based. I can understand this. But then concerning 15,000 and per year and 7,000 flats recovered every year. Now, I want to say that you won't be able to really accelerate your public housing construction program too much. But then what about the 7,000 flats per year? Now, say for example, now why is it that people like Kwok-hing are still living in public rental flats? How many people there are who are as wealthy or as well off as Kwok-hing? I think such flats should be recovered. I think Kwok-hing has really misunderstood the situation. All right, wait for your turn, Secretary. Now, in fact, we've looked at information about the private sector market. We want to really understand more about the private property market. And then concerning private sector flats completed and not offered for sale. Now, I want to say that, as pointed out in Para 24, there are only about 4,000 unsold units of completed projects. And then there are flats under construction and not offered for sale yet. And we hope that property developers can, as soon as possible, offer the flats for sale after the flats have been completed. In fact, the steering committee is looking at the quota and point system, and we are looking at whether there can be flexible arrangements for singletons and other groups. All right, you've overrun. I really can't allow you extra time. Mr. Kwok-hing. One LegCo member applied for exemption. His name was Lee Kai-ming. He said that although he was quite well off, he wanted to stay in a PRH flat. He said what would happen if he was no longer a LegCo member. So he was pro-communist, but I was subject to means testing. Now, if you are of the view that the housing department has shown favoritism towards me, you make a report, you make a complaint. In fact, I have just been subject to a means test. But it doesn't matter. I was accused of receiving US dollar notes. You know, Tam Yu Chong used to be in a small flat, and then he was in Hang Fa Chun, and then there are members who have become really rich because of participation in politics. Now, I want to say that if one's income is not commensurate with one's official position, if he is a civil servant, he will be arrested. Now, I think, say for a living area of less than 7 square meters, for example, if you offer a rent subsidy, then people will come forward to report or to declare. And then you can give an extra incentive for those who come forward to report if they live in structurally dangerous subdivided flats. And then concerning the proposed tax on sites lying idle, and then capital gains tax, do they meet the definition of a simple tax regime? My answer is yes. And then land supply, I want to say that C.Y. Leung is playing tricks. But of course, we can't only blame him. We should also blame Donald Tsang. He was elected because he was anti-Donald Tsang. Now, I think it's simple. Now, if there are vacant sites, and ask the town planning board to zone them PRH sites. Of course, there will be objections, so I understand. And then I think there should be a selling or auctioning of land on a regular basis. The application list system should be stopped. I've said this many times. And then PRH supply. Yes, choosing the flat for the first time within 3 years, that's true. But then people have to wait much longer if they before they can really move into the flats. Now I think you can come and investigate me. Anthony Cheung, send someone to investigate me. All right, please do not engage in crosstalk. Mr. Leung Chi-Cheung. Mr. Leung. Silence, please. Sorry, Chairman, sorry. Please give me back my time. Yes. Chairman, concerning flats in the private sector, 67,000 in the coming few years. And then public sector flats, excluding HOS, PRH, I mean only PRH, 75,000. So we can see that our public housing production simply cannot meet the demand in society. So how can we step up public housing production? It seems that no solutions are offered in the policy address, except what was going to happen after 2018. But my judgment is that, or my observation is that no solutions are proposed. Now, members have put forward many suggestions. Sale of flats to sitting tenants. Now, in fact, many residents have made this suggestion. Many of them are well-off tenants. They have to live in PRH. And then are you trying to encourage them to all turn to the private sector? But then these 67,000 may not be sold at the same time or at one go. They may be hoarding up of flats. So it's wrong for the administration to force people, so to speak, to buy flats in the private sector. And so I think the policy address merely points out the problems, but fails to offer solutions. And then I would say something about cage apartments and subdivided flats in the urban area. In fact, there are a lot of factory buildings in the urban area. Why is it that they can't be converted into residential buildings? Right, best space apartments, cage apartments, subdivided flats. The administration's mindset should not be that they have to exist. Right, Secretary, 30 seconds. Chairman, concerning factory buildings, whether they can be revitalized to provide transitional housing. In fact, many have put forward this suggestion. But I want to say that we do not own these factory buildings. Most of them are not owned by us. But then, of course, we do understand that PRH production can't catch up with demand, but we're doing our best. And then PRH, 16 to 17,000. And then private flats, 67,000, and we will also sell the surplus HOS flats. And then as a transitional arrangement, we have the 5,000 who can buy the HOS flats with premium not paid and so on and so forth. But we understand in the long run we must increase supply. We do understand that. Mr. Kwok, I want to refer to para 13 of the paper. It says something about the HA's public housing construction program. So we understand that within this term of government, on the average, only about 15,000 new PRH flats will be completed every year. And the Secretary has said that if additional sites can be identified, then the supply targets can be adjusted. But members are concerned. Can we in 2 to 3 years' time, reach a target of an average of 20,000 flats per year?
So within the next 5 years, in particular during the later stage, if you're able to increase the figure so that on average you can offer some 20,000 units a year, then obviously that's something that the community at large would like to see, and they actually want even more. And as a representative from the engineering sector, what I'm most concerned about is about resources from different sectors. In particular, for civil servants from the professional grades, the workload will increase. And therefore, I'm concerned about this. And if you're able to put up some 20,000 units a year on average after 2018, then during this 5-year term, many of the initiatives will have to start. Now that the Director is also here, I'd like to know more about resources planning. Have you already started the ball rolling? Because in the past, as we have to increase manpower for the construction of HOS flats, we support that. And if you really want to serve people with pragmatism, then you will also have to consider this need. Bureau Director, for manpower, I'll ask the Permanent Secretary to tell you more. All right, with regard to the production rate, for the next 5 years, yes, as many members wish, we hope that in the end we'll be able to produce more. And therefore, in the short to medium term, in terms of the increase in land supply, we'll see what we can do. We'll try our best. Yes, Permanent Secretary.
Yes, indeed, we have already started seeking additional resources. And in fact, in the last RAE and in the most recent RAE, we managed to secure over 350 additional posts at all levels. That's from director right down to basic new recruits. Most of those are technical posts. They're engineers, architects, site technicians, and so on and so forth. We will continue to seek additional resources as we go forward. And indeed, I would take this opportunity to ask members' support for our bids for the RAE for the director posts that will be coming up to Finance Committee shortly. Thank you.
All right, members. For those in the first round, there are 7 more members, and as you know, we can only have a meeting up to 6:45, and therefore 3 minutes each. We will have to control it very strictly, and if we have more time, then we will have the second round. Yes, Mr. Wu Chi-wai. Thank you, Chairman. As we know, housing problem is a question of supply, and in the short term, yes, you're not able to come up with flats. So I'd like to ask this. Just now, repeatedly, the Bureau said that it would be thinking about revitalizing industrial buildings so that interim housing can be provided. If that's the case, then would the Bureau consider, for those who have for HOS flats that have not had the premium paid, can you also offer them for rent so that there can be short-term rental market, and that would also ease the demand so that the pressure on these rental flats would also be eased. And also for some greenfield sites, can you hand over more such sites to either the HA or the developers so that in terms of supply of land, you do not have to rely on the public sector departments for making the modifications or adjustments? Bureau Director. All right, the first question is about HOS owners. Can they subdivide their flats and let them? All right, in the past, Well, in your questions, you've asked them, and we've already told you our concerns and consideration. And of course, in the LTHS steering committee, that will be further discussed. We understand members' suggestions with regard to greenfield sites, giving them to private developers. In other words, there are some greenfield sites we can ask the developers. Well, mainly it's the HA that will be asked or entrusted to do the work. All right, these are greenfield sites. They have not been formed, right? Then that would take more time. Because if they are not yet formed, then a lot more advanced work will have to be carried out. And that's why we are striving to get land available. And as soon as land is handed over to us, then we will build flats right away. And also for redeveloping old estates, well, you're doing that in Pak-Tien Estate, and there are similar estates elsewhere. So will you be coming up with a rolling stock scheme for redeveloping old estates, so that we will know better about the supply situation? Yes, as we have said, we will consider in appropriate locations releasing some of the older housing estates, so that there can be more room for further development. Well, can you give us the figures? Well, we do not have a rolling scheme. So specifically, we'll be looking at the individual housing estate, and we will conduct investigation on individual basis. But then we also have to have a decanting or decanting arrangement. Well, for in Kowloon East, while you have the two housing estates in Kai Tak, well, for Warlock Estate and also Kai Yip Estate, you can consider redeveloping them. We hope that you can give us the plans as soon as possible. Bureau Director? Well, Chairman, well, for more specific details, I'll defer to the Bureau Director, Bureau Secretary.
Looking at all of the existing old estates over 40 years old, and we will be putting proposals to the Housing Authority in due course. But let me stress one thing here. Redevelopment of an old estate is a long-term process. It usually takes 10 to 15 years. It's not a quick solution. It's an important part of the overall package, but it's not a quick solution.
Alan Leung. Thank you, Chairman. I think the Housing Director can confirm, or if you have a disposed site, then basically if you can put up flats for sale, then if you hand it over to the housing department, then in about 2.5 years time, people can move in. But then for a greenfield site, well, by summer 2015, you will be able to put up flats for occupation. But then CY Leung is not willing to offer any of these sites. Is it that he doesn't have any sincerity at all? That's the first question. Bureau Director? Well, in the application list to put up sites for PRH development, well, indeed that happened in the past, and therefore in the future it can also happen. Well, more specifically, well, if it's just about the construction phase, well, it will take about 1 year for site formation and foundation works, and then for another 2.5 years for the superstructure development. But then sometimes before the construction, there are also some planning procedures, including community consultation and so on. Mr. Leung, but then if you're not willing to put up just one site, then it means that you're actually not concerned about the pressing needs of the people. You have no sincerity. And also for Choi Yun Village, and also NT Northeast, and also NT North Development, the administration will not be miserly. You would be prepared to revoke or invoke the land resumption ordinance because it's for public use. But then from what we have heard, there are many agriculture land in the new territories. They are actually hoarded up by developers for future use. So when CY Leung thinks about how he can respond to the housing demand of the community, has he considered that is under the land resumption ordinance, can some of these sites be resumed? These are farmlands, so can that be resumed for public use? In other words, for public housing development? Bureau Director, Chairman, as we have said, well, we will have to make the best use of site, and number two, we will have to release land resources as far as possible. Recently, we have also heard people say that, well, developers, if they're willing to offer more of their sites for development, then that would be good. Well, any feasible proposal will be considered. But then in practice, have you considered that? I'd just like to know, have you considered asking the developers to release the agricultural land in their hands for development? Well, for individual cases, it's not appropriate for us to comment on them here. But then we hope as far as possible to make the best use of land resources. Well, for some of the farmland, if you build flats there, that would also include rezoning and also environmental considerations and so on. We will have to bear those in mind. These are planning requirements. Well, Chairman, actually, CY Leung actually does not have the gut and also the ability. If you had the ability and everything, then you would be resorting to all means to develop and set up this message. KK Fong, from this policy address, you do not see that the administration has any intention of doing anything at all, because you never said no to what we propose. But then when you said that you would be considering that, actually you would be throwing that into the rubbish bin. In fact, from the Donald Trump era, we've been making these proposals, but then you never said no. But then you just continue to consider it. All right, in paragraph 53, you said that, he said that, people are actually having a difficult time, and he actually said that, for a flat that's divided into 3 levels, it's not about, and it's about sewage facilities, poor ventilation, and in some cases, no natural light. All right, is likened to hillside squatters and squatter huts. All right, in the past, it was exposed to everyone, but then it's now indoor, and the severity of the problem is no less than in those years. All right, he's able to put up with these moving words, but then nothing is done about it. So we will have to wait for the 15,000 units a year, and then after he steps down, it will be increased to 20,000. But then what's the purpose of setting these out now? So apparently people are actually living in dire straits, and still nothing is done about it. And then you said that I'll be outsourcing this, and I'll be counting the number of subdivided flats in the community. Are you solving the problem this way? And also for the squatter hut program, you do have a demolition plan, but then for this, nothing is done about it. The ADPL has also given you some suggestion. All right, if you can ask the URA do the redevelopment, then some 60% of the flat owners will be moving out. And also for Park Tin Estate, many have already moved out. Can you redevelop that? And also for the private developer, can you also make use of the redeveloped flats and so on? For the vacant industrial flats, can you make use of them? All right, these are interim measures. And also for the application list, all right, for sites that have been left there without being applied for more than 24 months, you can also take them out for PRH development, and you can also build HOS flats on them. And also for urban renewal, I've also given you a list for those districts over 40 years old. Why can't you redevelop them? Why is it that in the past you were able to put up flats for them for interim housing? And in fact, for the first phase of the redevelopment site or of the redevelopment estate, you'll be able to offer them for recanting. So you always said that you'll be prepared to consider any suggestion from Wu Chi-wai, from KK Fong, from FTU, and so on and so forth. But then nothing comes about after your consideration. So how can you explain? All right, CY Leung is saying that people are living in such appalling situation. It's a disgrace. And yet, what have you done? I've never been so agitated before. If you had not described these people in such appalling state, I would not have been so angry about it. All right, in the first round, we have 6 more members who are queuing up to speak. And according to our estimate, we will not have time for the second round. All right? Leung Yu-chung, Chairman, Bureau Director, you've only assumed office for 6 months now. But I don't know how come you're so smart. You've been able to learn from the chief executive in terms of his sophistry. You've been able to use figures to cover up these problems. All right, just now, you time and again reiterated that for the 3-year target is your target, and you would adhere to it. But then you can just do some simple arithmetic. It's not possible. 200,000. Well, back in Eva Chang's era, she said that the average waiting time should be 3 years, and now it's 200,000. Because back in her days, it's only 150,000. But then you just said that some might no longer be eligible. How many? Well, you should have the figures, but then you never announced them. You never released them. Why can't you just come clean on that? Why can't you just tell us how many would not be eligible? I think you're playing with the figures. Because for the 3-year average waiting time, we've been talking about that for years. You can ask Mr. Yao, the Undersecretary. We've been querying the figures for years. We are still challenging it. Well, yes, in 3 years, you're just trying to you're just making the first offer. After you make the first offer, all right, for the unit that has been offered, all right, this applicant has refused that, and that applicant has continued to refuse that. Either it's close to the refuse collection room, or somebody has died there, and therefore people do not take it up. And then for the next round, well, the earliest would be 9 months later. Sometimes people will have to wait for another 2 years before a second offer. That's why there are so many people on the list. So even if there are 100,000 who are not eligible, still there are 100,000 with 15,000 units available every year, and in the next 2 years, actually you're talking about 13,000. It's less than 15,000. So how can you meet the 3-year target? I'm not trying to make suggestions to you, because many members have already put forth suggestions. As KK Fong said, well, you're only considering all these suggestions, but nothing comes about it. But then for the 3-year target, what are you going to do about it? Do you give him time to answer the question? How can you meet the 3-year target? Bureau Director. Chairman, yes, of course, I understand that with regard to the 3-year average waiting time, members have a lot of skepticisms about it. You also challenged the figure. But then I've also been the chairman of the Subsidized Housing Subcommittee of the Housing Authority. I understand this. Yes, by this we refer to the first offer, and if the applicant is not able to take up the offer, then of course the waiting time will be somewhat longer. But then anyway, we will still be referring to the waiting list, and at the LTHS steering committee we are looking into it. But then can you give us the time for the second offer and the third offer? What's the average waiting time for the second and third offer? Can you also tell us when's the second or third offer is being made? So can that be done? Can you announce the time for the second and third offer? Yes, we'll do some analysis into it.
仲有5位第一輪。
5 more members in the first round. And I believe we will exceed 6:45, and so I don't think we can have a second round. Mr. Michael Tian. Chairman, C.Y. Leung in his manifesto said there would be 35,000 PRH flats a year. Now it's 15,000 a year, and then 7,000 flats recovered every year, so a total of about 22,000. But I want to know more about the 7,000. In November 2011, in reply to a member's question, Eva Chang said that in 0809, 254 and 237 flats were recovered, 183 flats were recovered in 2011, and every year 2,100 flats were surrendered voluntarily, and then about 600 they received eviction notices. So it seems that the figure is only about 3,000 per year. So how come you're saying that you can recover 7,000 flats per year? Secretary. So the figure 7,000 is based on our experience in the past few years. Mr. Tian, on the 2nd of November 2011, Eva Chang said something in this council, and there's this great discrepancy between what she said and what Mr. Zhang is saying today. I really want to have the figures. Now, both you and Eva Chang was an official, you are an official, and we're talking about a time gap of 1 year, 3 months only. Why is it that the number 3,000 suddenly has become 7,000? Permanent Secretary.
On this. We actually recycle in total about 12,000 every year. About 5,000 of those are recycled within the public housing tenant. So a tenant will move from a larger flat to a smaller flat, or from a family will split. We don't get any additional units available for allocation to people on the waiting list. But most of the units we get for allocation, that's about 7,000 out of the total of 12 to 14,000, come from things like people dying, unfortunately, people moving to the mainland or moving into geriatric homes, from people who become ineligible, and also through our enforcement action. So, for example, where we get reports of people abusing the use of public housing units, we will step in and issue notices to quit. So we do actually recycle on an annual basis around 7,000 for new people on the waiting list, but we actually have a lot more churn within the system.
So this seems like a contradiction between this and what Eva Chan said in 2011. I think we need some clarification on that. Okay?
Yes, Mr. Tian, I think we will look at Ms. Eva Chang's reply in 2011. Yes, I think you really need to clarify this matter. All right? They've promised to clarify the matter. Mr. James Toh. Now, I can't speak as quickly and rapidly as KK Fong. I want to say that I entirely agree with him. I entirely support what he said in the 3 minutes. And then second, developers may just submit substandard plans, and then they delay the whole process, and then they may decide not to sell the flats or not to offer them for sale because the interest rate and also, of course, the interest rate is very low at the moment. I can remember that some time ago there was the measure requiring developers to, within 6 months after obtaining the consent, offer the flats for sale in the market. And the number of flats in each batch offered for sale in the market must be reasonable. So earlier on, there was this clause in the lease. I mean, of course, this can only apply to new leases or when sites are sold. I believe, that there used to be such a clause, but then that clause, I believe, was scrapped in 2003. So, will you consider inserting this clause in the lease? In other words, after they've completed the flats, then within a certain period of time, they must sell the flats. That would help to attain certainty in supply. Secretary, Mr. Toh is right, Chairman. Now, of course, if we put them in the land sale conditions, then of course the developer must comply with such conditions. I think this is feasible, Chairman. But then Mr. Toh is asking you whether you will be reinstating this practice. This practice or this measure was adopted in 1997. No, the clause was scrapped because the market slumped. So I just want to make sure that there will not be any hoarding up of flats. Now, Chairman. Now, because I'm not responsible for this policy area, so I can't really give a definitive answer, but I can only say that this is an option that can be considered. Mr. Kenneth Lam. Yes, Chairman. The Secretary said that he wanted to see the healthy development of the private sector market. I want to say that this is never going to happen. Now, concerning this private sector market, supply is limited, but I think demand is rather unlimited. Demand for property in Hong Kong is rather unlimited, so I think demand side management or demand management is necessary. Firstly, concerning outside buyers, do you have any anti-money laundering procedures in relation to these outside buyers? And then second, if private property prices rise very rapidly, then will you consider temporarily stopping people, non-permanent residents buying flats in the private sector in Hong Kong? Secretary, I can only say that there is shortage of supply in the market, and then with regard to demand, as Mr. Leung has pointed out, the demand is very big. So we need to look at demand as well as supply. Now, we launched 2 demand site management measures last year. We will continue to monitor the development in the property market. If necessary, we will not rule out launching further measures. But Secretary, I have put forward 2 concrete measures. Will you adopt them? First of all, any anti-money laundering. When one needs to open a bank account, there are anti-money laundering procedures. So why is it that when outsiders buy flats in Hong Kong, luxury flats costing 20-30 million, why is it that there are no anti-money laundering procedures? And then second, if property prices really soar very rapidly, will you disallow people outside Hong Kong from buying flats? Now, in fact, concerning anti-money laundering measures, I believe SFST has already given replies in this council in the past, and I believe he also understands Mr. Leung's concern. And then, from the administration's point of view, we are willing to consider measures, but we have to consider the implications, whether they are necessary, and so on and so forth. No further follow-up questions, Chairman. Mr. K.K. Kwok. Chairman, I think the government's housing policy is extremely weak. I don't want to repeat the points that others have made. You're saying that you don't have land. But then what about sites on the application list for 24 months or more? Is it that the Development Bureau is unwilling to give you land? Answer this question. Why is it that the land can't be used? All right, so that's your question. Yes. In fact, Chairman, in reply to a question raised by another member, I said that in the past, we did make sites available in the application list for PRH purpose, and we'll continue to do that. In fact, yesterday, Secretary for Development said that recently a site had been taken out from the application list for PRH development. But the Chairman, I'm talking about the 13 sites. They were on the application list in the past 2 years. So can I ask you this question again? Did you approach the Secretary for Development for more sites, for more land? Now, they didn't give you land, but did you ask for land? Our bureau and the Development Bureau are cooperating and communicating very closely on supply of sites. So people are waiting for flats, and yet there are these sites just lying under the sun. The Secretary for Development said one site had been taken out from the list for PRH development, but there are 13 sites on the application list. We have to look at the nature and use of different sites. All right, enough. Chairman, so is it that you want to push up property prices? Or is it that you want to push up the price of the land? You have a price in mind, and you have to make sure that this price is paid. No, but why is it that these sites are not taken out for PRH development? If necessary, sites will be taken out from the application list for development. All right, Chairman. Some private property developers do not offer completed flats for sale in the market. So will you impose a tax or a duty on developers for slow progress in construction, for not putting up flats, first-hand set flats for sale in the market? In fact, I've answered a similar question already, Chairman. I think in considering any tax, we have to consider the impact on the economy and other factors, and I'm sure the FS will consider all the relevant factors. Chairman, so how can you make sure that people can move into PRH 1 year earlier? All right, Mr. Abraham Shack, after you've asked your questions, we'll have the meeting adjourned. I want to know how many flats there are in the hands of developers. Some members seem to suggest that developers are unwilling to sell the flats. Now, I believe members who do not do business don't understand that there is a cost in doing business. Now, developers do not want to keep the flats and keep some mice in them. So they haven't got approval from the government. So so perhaps we can ask why certain flats have not been offered for sale. Now, so members seem to suggest that developers do not want to sell the flats they have constructed. That's not going. That has never happened, Mr. Kwok. That's not going to happen. We have to look at whether there is demand in the market, and also, the policy address is about the medium term and the long term. I think for the short term, things will remain pretty much the same. In order to resolve the problems, we need to have PRH, we need to have HOS. Alan Leung said that sites should be taken out from the application list for PRH or HOS development. That's a good idea. And then second, URA can make use of the land resumption ordinance to resume land. Why is it that such sites can't be used for HOS or PRH development? Why is it that URA has to enjoy all the profits? And then the $40,000 income limit for HOS flats, and then PRH 9,000 odd. But then there will be there are people living in subdivided flats. We need extraordinary measures during extraordinary times. So, what's going to happen to those in between the two income limits? And also sites. We allow him time to reply? No need, because I believe he'll agree with me. What I mean is that he will agree with me that such options should be considered.
Yes, well, you can build a PRH in many districts, but then, all right, some of these owners are under the link REIT. So as a result, within the district, you will have to build more HOS and PRH flats. But then sometimes it's not feasible because you're talking about the same lease. So can you answer the question? No time is left because we have already overrun and we have already extended the meeting, and therefore we will have to adjourn the meeting now. Chairman, even though I do not have time to answer the question, but then can I supplement some details? Well, I'd just like to say that I've heard all their suggestions and comments, and we will consider them. Thank you. All right, meeting is adjourned.